Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to USA Today bestselling author Chuck Tingle about Bury Your Gays. Welcome, Chuck.
Oh, thank you for having me. It is so wonderful to be here.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this. So I'm going to start in a little different place because occasionally I jump all over the place. What is a buckaroo?
Oh, well, I have a fairly unique way of speaking. I would say, honestly, we're all buckaroos in some way. It is I think it's a general term for pretty much anyone who is not a scoundrel or a devil. But in more specific trot, I think I've kind of evolved to use that when talking about fans of Chuck. So, a buckaroo can be anyone, but generally, I think if I'm using that term, it means all the buckaroos trotting to my book events or things like that. I think, a lot of fandoms have that. You got your Trekkies and Star Trek and so on. Lady Gaga has the Little Monsters, and I think that old Chuck has the buckaroos.
I love that. So I've also heard you mention your work as protest work. Will
Yes.
you give the audience an explanation of what that means to you?
Yes. So for those who are not familiar, I do write horror novels published through Tor Nightfire, and I also write erotica that many would find the premises unique and strange. But in general, I think my work in Tingleverse erotica is a sort of even when it is not directly addressing kind of a current event, through which I would say it is kind of more a direct protest. Overall, the entire concept is kind of, a long time ago, a conservative talking point, a big one against gay marriage was, well, what's going to happen if we let two buckaroos get married? Are you going to marry a dang tree? Or are you going to marry a dang 8 Bigfoots? There was this sort of slippery slope argument. And even as a young buckaroo hearing that, I always thought, well, what would be so wrong with that? Like, what is the problem here? If any adults are loving any other adults in any combination they please, I have no problem with that. And so I kind of feel like the Tingleverse is seeing this kind of conservative talking point and then taking it to its extreme and showing this world of trotting along with big feet or unicorns or physically manifested concepts, and kind of showing that rather than the dystopia that they kind of laid out, it would actually be a utopia. Letting anyone love whoever they want is a utopian situation, not the things falling apart that they described.
I totally agree. And I laughed when you were describing that because I remember those talking points for the conservatives. And I thought, you know what? Why does your mind automatically go to me having sex with an animal? I mean, it's funny to me. I've never seen a Democrat stand up and say, this is something we espouse, but yet the religious right and the conservatives, they want to talk about that. I'm like, golly, is this where you put your concentration?
Yes. Well, it is. They definitely, I will say their intellect is not on display with these arguments. And the arguments also never change. It kind of shows that they don't really have much substance, because if you look at, while that they still talk about that a little bit, that has kind of evolved now that I think they see gay marriage as kind of like a losing topic as time goes by, and they realize that most buckaroos are not with them on that front. Now they have to attack trans buckaroos, and it's the exact same talking point. It's every sort of issue that was kind of the gay issue 25 years ago. They're kind of straw man arguments. Now they've just realized, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. Let's move that to trans buckaroos.
Yes, and I think they also see a lot of monetization, if that's the way to conjugate that word. They make a lot of money off of things like gay marriage and our lives. And I think, they feel like they need somebody, as you say, to marginalize in on, and that's now trans people. And
Yes,
that is so
yes.
disgusting. I mean, we're all humans. We should just be allowed to be who we are. And that is just something that some people can't let go of. I mean, it always seems that there needs to be someone who's less than. Drives me bananas.
Yes, well, it is their kind of strategy has always been to find a villain or create a villain, and then kind of promote their platform through kind of rage or fear.
Mhm.
And I think when you're doing that, eventually you're gonna run out of villains. So you kind of have to start making them up, and generally that's what they do.
Totally agree. So now let's talk about Bury Your Gays. So I love this. It was so good. Can you give the audience a preview of what the book is about?
Yes. So, Bury Your Gays is about a screenwriter who is asked to kill off his two queer lesbian leads in his television show. He refuses, and he is a queer screenwriter. And then all of his monsters begin to kind of appear in reality. And it's funny talking about my books because they always have a sense of mystery to them, where the less you know the better. I would say that's where it starts, and then it gets even wilder from there, because I tend to write in a sort of like a unraveling fashion. But that's the gist. It really is a story about kind of queer art and queer representation through art, but also just kind of human art and what it means to create. And I think that really, it's just something that's important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of buckaroos who, the term "bury your gays," for those that don't know, is the media trope of either killing off the queer characters, but generally it means when the queer characters will come out and then immediately die. It was much more common, 20 years ago, but it still happens. So it's definitely about representation in media.
It is, and in reading this, I was thinking about the movie 50 Shades of Grey, and Matt Bomer at one point had been suggested as perhaps being the lead, and there was a lot of backlash from that. And I thought to myself, here's a handsome man who's a very talented actor. Everyone playing in a movie is an actor. They don't have to be straight or gay. They're simply an actor. And I was thinking about how we've made a lot of strides, but we still have a long ways to go.
Yes, that is true. I didn't realize that was an early fan cast. He would have actually been. I mean, he's a very good, handsome lead. I will say that much.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And the unique thing was most of the pushback came from straight women who were just
Oh, yes.
horrified that a gay man could be a leading man in 50 Shades of Grey. I'm like, it turns out we can be a leading man in every aspect, in every way, if you're talented.
Yes.
So in this, you give us chapters that are called inspiration, and that was a way of telling Misha's backstory. And I felt for Misha, and I felt like Misha was a very fully formed character, but these inspirations or flashbacks, some of them were very heartbreaking.
Yes.
And how hard was that to write, or was it something that came very naturally for you?
I think that the point of the story, as I said, or the point of the book, is kind of about what it is to create as a human, as an artist, and how these things that are kind of traumatic in our path, in our journey, that turning them into art is in itself an act of love, but also a therapeutic act. and how, we can turn trauma into catharsis. And I think that sometimes folks hold on to that in the sense of you need trauma to be like a valid artist. And I don't believe that to be true, but I do think that if you do have trauma, in my own personal life, it's very helpful to kind of to use art as a means of therapy without ever having to go into the dang office. It's kind of like the most primal therapeutic form there is. And so I think these inspiration chapters were important to that. One, kind of just as an overall theme of what I said, but two, because each one kind of corresponds to a different one of the monsters in the book. So you kind of meet these creatures, and then you go back and see, oh, that's why this creature was designed this way. That's why this monster talks like this or acts like this. So, in some ways it's practical because as a reader, you're going to crave understanding of these things, and it's kind of fun to see those connections. But thematically, I just think it really works with that theme of taking these events and then kind of processing them through art.
And while trauma is obviously traumatic, it also gives you a way to have empathy for other characters and other situations. And that is something that Misha does so well in this, in the fact that I felt like the trauma that Misha suffered was something that made him a lot more empathetic.
Yes, I think so. Yes, I mean, yeah, as human beings, we are built for community. We are built for love, and so I think there is that natural thing where if you hear a story of someone who you care about, or even just someone who is another human being going through something difficult, you're going to automatically connect with that and kind of care about protecting them.
I agree. So now, do you have in real life a best friend, Tara, in your life?
Oh, that's a great question. I think Tara is kind of an amalgamation of buckaroos. She is actually, there are certain mannerisms that are based on a buckaroo that I know, but really, I would say it's like 4 or 5 different. A lot in Barrier Gaze is kind of different characters through film and different things like that I kind of just bring together. I think as creators, we're tempted to kind of, you're supposed to kind of file the serial numbers off of these things we create and not show our work so much, even though everyone is influenced by different things. And I kind of intentionally in Barrier Gaze didn't do that very much because I wanted it to have a certain nostalgic feel for kind of like the things that it's referencing and have these little hints. And I think that actually works. Whereas normally you want to feel kind of disconnected from pop culture. In this, I think it was more connected. That's more of a comment about, I think, the monsters and the creatures than Tara. But Tara certainly, there is a character in the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer who is a very big example of Barrier Gaze, who that's kind of named after. And Misha also is a reference to a situation with the show Supernatural, where there was a Barrier Gaze situation. So most of the heroes in this are named after an actual kind of pop culture Barrier Gaze situation.
I love that. I love that. And one nice thing is the addition of Tara and Zeke to Misha's life was really nice to read because they were a family, a real family. And that was important to me as a reader because, Misha is put into a situation that is not good in the fact that the studio wants him to bury his gays. But yet at home, he had 2 people who believed in him and 2 people that when he had conversations with them, they were all on the same page. And that was a nice thing to read.
Yes. Well, I think that a lot of art, and I don't know if this is necessarily queer art, but just art in general and stories, you have these kind of groups where a lot of the internal conflict is between these friends. I mean, this goes back to Shakespeare. It's like you have your core friends, and the conflict comes from that. There is a time and a place for that kind of story. I find it interesting and fascinating. But as far as what I like to write, especially if I'm writing queer stories, I kind of to emphasize how much I think that the community and how impressive I think it is, like the tightness of this community, while there are disagreements, the ability to work together and to kind of overcome things with this really powerful togetherness. A lot of my writing is versus an external force, and that the main characters in a lot of what I do, the conflict is rarely about this group of 2 or 3 battling internally. They may have disagreements. They'll definitely have different character traits, but generally it's them fighting some external force. And that is one, like I said, I think that like I just kind of love and resonate with the fact that I think in general, not always, but in general, the queer community is able to do that. But also I kind of feel like in real life, like outside of stories, that's kind of how it goes. We have these little disagreements with our friends. We lose friends, we gain them. That's human existence.
That is, yes.
But there are some core buckaroos where it's like a lot of the drama in your life is these other things, and you can call on these core friends, and they're there for you. And funny enough, that is kind of not that common in art. If you look at any TV show or anything, it's all this drama between the group. And so I don't know. I think I just shy away from that because in reality, I think in my personal experience, it's much more about an external force that enters your life. That could change, but that's just kind of my interest in writing at the moment, I think.
And, I think when you talk about doing protest work, it almost really should be about that external force, because otherwise we would only be protesting against our friends, and that doesn't quite work. Or yes. It doesn't for me. I mean, I am a pacifist at heart. I can go to war if I have to, but I'd prefer not to. But if I need to stand up for me or my friends, I'm certainly willing to do it.
Well, I think interestingly, and to your point, as far as marginalized groups, what's very interesting and pretty unique about the queer community is that it is actually, you have all these different letters, and that they have all kind of banded together as this sort of coalition of ideas. And so I think that's probably what I resonate with, is it's like, you can have this infighting, which I talk a lot about in my art, as a bisexual buckaroo myself. There are disagreements with all the other letters, but in general, when push comes to shove, everyone in the LGBTQIA really, over the long term, will come together and kind of fight as a unit, which I think is just so fascinating. And that's probably why this idea resonates with me, that while there's can be these internal disagreements between characters, different points of view, and all these things, I really am fascinated by that ability to come together against an external force. I think it's really beautiful.
I agree. And that sort of is a segue into my next question, a little bit anyway. So let's talk a little bit about AI. So the Hollywood community came together last year or year before last during the strikes and banded together against AI. AI figures into your book as almost a separate character. Do you have any thoughts you want to share about AI?
Yes. Well, I wish that when the negotiations were happening, and this is in real life, I wish they would have been stronger against AI. There were some good things done, but I think it should have been more, personally. But in the story of Bury Your Gays, it is in kind of a post-contract negotiation landscape, a sort of alternative near future, or an alternative now, depending on when you listen to this, where the restrictions on AI have proven to not be enough. And currently, as a sort of backdrop of the story, the Best Actor nomination is for an actor whose performance was entirely AI generated and who has been dead for a few years. So that is kind of the what is simmering as this story takes place, and it kind of weaves through. I said earlier, human creation, kind of intentionally, and I really do kind of think that ultimately, my problem with any sort of AI situation is not necessarily the technology itself, in the sense of what kind of the shareholder meetings and the marketing people at different companies call AI is many different things. Most of it not artificial, most of it not actually intelligent. It's just a buzzword for stock. And really, the large language model situation, I think, is kind of the most the most what we mean when we say AI currently, of like generative AI, is using these giant data sets that they don't really have the right to use, in my belief, and that it is at its core unethical. If you start using a small data set that you own all the rights to, then you're no longer really talking about ethics. You're just talking about taste, in which case I don't really have the taste for it either, but I don't find it to be as like broadly unethical as what's happening right now. So I think, as with all art, I have these feelings about it, and those feelings are kind of, being processed through a novel. That's kind of what it's all about, is to have these feelings and write a book, and then see where you stand on them when you really kind of put them to the grindstone.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, I would hate to think that someone takes your book and feeds it into a computer, and then it creates other stories based on your writing. That to me is a total ripoff, and it should be completely illegal. But that is not where all of the world wants to go. So we'll see how it plays out in the long run.
Yes.
So once again, the book is Bury Your Gays. Chuck Tingle, do you have a website or a social media you'd like to share?
Yes. I mean, I am on pretty much every social media. If you just go to Chuck Tingle or at Chuck Tingle, pretty much anywhere, you're going to find me. I'm not too hard to find. And also chucktingle.com. I would say, if you are interested in queer horror, I have Bury Your Gays. I have a book last year called Camp Damascus, and that is about a conversion therapy camp. I have a book next year. I'm basically on the schedule to be putting out a queer horror book a year through Tor Nightfire. So that's I guess just stay tuned, and if you're interested, then follow me, and you'll see those updates.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Chuck, so much for being with us today. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.